This podcast is about you. Are you ready? Take a moment and ask yourself, do I know the truth, and do I even care? Well, if you care at all, we have something for you. Stick around. We're a podcast that does not ignore the truth about life, people, or God. Larry Kutzler has been a pastor, a Bible commentator, a radio and podcast producer, and now is your host. This is a podcast you won't forget.
The mentor relationship is more like a friendship. You know, you can't just walk up to a random person and say, will you be my mentor? Of course. Just like you can't walk up to a random person and say, will you be my friend? That's not how it works. Mentor relationships evolve because a mentor always has time for you. They see something in you for some reason that they make time for you. And they learn as much as they teach.
We are bringing a bold statement about Christ. He's our only hope to face the darkness in our day. Thanks for joining us for the City Sites Podcast.
My guest today is Pastor Charlie Bolstridge from Pointway Church in Baxter, Minnesota. And I love talking to pastors. And our conversation ahead of us will have to do with mentoring. He chose the theme out of the second chapter of Titus. But before we do that, Pastor Charlie, I want to know a little bit about you. I mean, what was the call in your life that brought you into the ministry? I mean, was it dramatic or was it sort of subtle? How did it happen?
Well, it's a funny story in many ways. It was kind of a backdoor way into ministry. In fact, when I'm mentoring young pastors, they'll say, how did you get in the ministry? How did that work? And I said, do not follow my example. I really did back into ministry. I worked in the secular world for many years. Currently, before I got into ministry, I was in industrial sales, traveling all over the East Coast. Was actually fairly good at it. I was over $1 million in sales, had the company car, had everything you could want. Brand new home, a wife, 3 beautiful children. Yeah, had it all in lovely New Hampshire. God closed that door rather abruptly. I ended up training the owner's son. Owner was going to retire and move to Arizona. Already had a house bought, and his son was going to come over and take over the business. And so Dad asked me to take him out and show him the ropes, and I trained my replacement. Unknowingly to me, Dad decided not to retire. And then 2 weeks before Christmas, found myself without work, without the company car. At the time, were devastating, but really was the turning point or the 2x4 that I needed to get into ministry. And so that was the beginning of it. And from there, it's just grown.
So you've been ministering how many years? So you're probably getting into ministry a little bit later than some. So how long have you been doing the ministry thing?
Roughly around 22 years.
Okay.
Different roles, different aspects of ministry. Been a senior pastor since 2010.
Okay.
So I was an assistant pastor, director of ministries, a couple other various roles.
Yeah, all kind of shaping you into what the Lord has you do today. Well, you actually, when I emailed you, Pastor Charlie, I said, let's do an interview. And you go, yeah, okay. I asked you what theme you'd like, and you said the second chapter of Titus, and you stated that we need 3 core people in our lives minimum. That piqued my interest. What in the world are you talking about?
Well, and this message is nothing new. I'm stealing it from Paul, but I believe we need a Paul in our life. You know, someone that's a little further ahead, a little few more gray hairs, or some experience more. I believe we need a Barnabas, that encourager, someone that kind of is in the same exact spot, someone to walk alongside of us, pick us up when we're down, and to really, just give us that encouragement. And then obviously a Timothy or a Titus, that younger man or younger woman, and bring them along as well. And so, but I believe we need all 3, not 1, not 2, but all 3 of those type people in our lives. And so that's where I come out of Titus 2. And of course, how that looks is based off Titus 2's teaching.
Well, I think it's great. In fact, I had mentioned in my little bullet points I sent you for our talking points today, my oldest son, who happens to be 50, and I said, man, you're getting old. And he says, well, I'll never catch up to you, Dad. You're right. But at 50 years old, he was talking about having a therapist one time in his life. And I thought, boy, that's really burying some wires, isn't it? He goes, yeah, but, I had some things I had to talk through, and I got through it. And so now I still have him as my therapist, but I reversed it a little bit or changed it around. He is now my coach, and he helps me understand some of the things that I don't see. Now, I think that's wise, don't you? Don't you think we all need a coach?
Yeah, and certainly someone and that's probably more like a Barnabas in some ways, and it doesn't mean our Barnabas can't have that Paul-like, they kind of, the roles can change a little bit in amongst them. They're not clearly defined, but certainly, yeah, that walking alongside, someone to encourage, point out those things that, hey, you're starting to go down a different path than what you originally said, or you need a little bit of help or correction. So
yeah, self-awareness is a big deal, and in my life, because I'm sort of thick-headed. My wife says it's called stubborn, but anyway, I'm stubborn. I don't see my flaws. I need someone to say, hey, listen, Larry, you're not right on this deal, or be careful with this. So we do need those mentors to kind of tweak us. And how do you find them, Pastor? How do you find your mentors?
Well, a lot of observation. To believe it or not, it's watching that other person, someone that I can follow. Paul says that, follow me as I follow Christ. And so I look for someone who's been following Christ. Maybe it's been someone in ministry a little bit longer, or someone that's gone through the phase that I'm coming up on that's a little bit ahead of me. So I look for that part of it from Paul's standpoint. And then looking for a younger person, it's the same way. Looking for someone that may be open for teaching, someone that I can invest some time in, some similarities. And so that's kind of how that process works. It's usually not a quick thought. If I were to just stop someone on the street and say, hey, who are you mentoring? Most people have no idea.
Yeah.
It's not typical. It has to be purposeful in that regard.
So what do you think prohibits, say, for example, leaders, whether they're pastors or Christian leaders in general, what prevents them or prohibits them from looking for mentors? Not everyone agrees with that. They figure, well, my ideas are just as good as theirs, right? So I don't really need it. I mean, what do you think? What prohibits us from having them?
Some of it's time commitment, because it is a lot of relationship. The only way I would be able to speak into someone is if I spend time with them, get to know them, and the time commitment's a lot. And I even in our leadership at church is going through this, and we talk about the time commitment, and you have to be purposeful in that. Sometimes you have to chase down to go find that person. They'll disappear from periods of time, but it's got to be someone that you can get a hold of. And so time commitment is probably one of them. The other could be fear of not knowing the answer. It's amazing how many times I think I'm mentoring somebody and they ask me a question and I am caught totally flat-footed. I have no idea. And I got to say, I just got to be honest with them, transparent, and say, you know what, I don't know, but let's spend some time and do some research on it, because I really don't know. That happens more often than not.
Right. Well, one of the reasons, Pastor, I wanted to interview you, because people that know you say this about you. They say, this guy's transparent. I mean, you see what you get, and so it's not something hidden, or you're not somebody in the pulpit and somebody else, out in public. You are Pastor Charlie wherever you are. That speaks well of leaders, right?
I appreciate that. One of the things that an older pastor invested in me actually told me, he says, it's a lot easier just to be yourself all the time than to try to be somebody else part-time and to have to shift gears. And so I took that to heart. Someone invested in me, and I'm thankful for that's been able to help me be myself in whatever situation God puts me in.
Well, and I think that's a good leader when you're vulnerable to a congregation. Some people say, well, be careful what you share. Well, that may be true to a point, but sometimes people like to see that their pastor, is human. Because we're sometimes talking about some very important principles, right? And it makes it sound like, well, I got it all together. Well, wait a minute. Maybe not so much. I struggle with many things I preach as the congregation does, right? I mean, do you find that to be the same?
Yeah, there's no special dispensation for pastors that we get off the hook from having the same struggles that every man or woman in our position. We all have that same needs and insecurities and sin issues that we have to work through. And so it's certainly, yeah. And to let our people know that helps us connect. And again, part of that relationship, which I can take a lot more criticism from someone I have a relationship with versus someone from the outside who I don't know. So it's the same thing in reverse.
Well, as a retired pastor myself, when I go to church, I like to see people who are relational and really have it simple. Put it in simple terms, simple language, and I appreciate that more than the theological. I mean, I've been in some services where the guy gets so theological, it's in the weeds, and I go, if I don't understand it, after 50 years of ministry, I don't know how those people do, right?
Yeah, and that's not my language anyways. Like I said, common language is easier. And I believe the Bible is written for all of us, and it's great. I appreciate those theologians. I appreciate those who study. My son is one of them. He's a Dallas grad, and I'm proud of that. But our conversations are real. Hey, love you, Dad. How was your golf game? Those are the relational things that we do. And so same thing with our church family. Yeah, we need to be able to explain it and how we live this out, this life that Christ has called us to.
Yeah, I just saw a video on the internet, a guy I knew or know. He was talking about something that I had never really given much thought to, because I was coming up in the ministry when we didn't have the internet, right? But he was talking about pastoral cheating. Have you ever heard that term?
No, I don't think I have.
Yeah, I didn't really either, but it's what he was referring to is pastors going to the internet and getting sermons, or you know what I mean, and taking somebody else's stuff, and he was using the word plagiarism. I don't know, but I've never done that. What do you think about that? I mean, this is kind of off script a little bit, but I'd like to know what you think about it.
Well, it's funny you should say that. There was a time we did a 40-day prayer with Rick Warren's material. And as part of the agreement, I had to preach his sermons. Now, it was full disclosure up front. It was the most awkward, hard thing that I think I ever had to do as far as trying to preach someone else's message and even use their examples. It was not comfortable at all. I think we probably do a disservice to our people if we were to do that. And I know I have seen sermon.org. There are all places to go get sermons, but I think our people just want God's word in a way to, how does this work in my life, and how can I use this to walk through this life? That's difficult.
Well, and I think people want our pastors to struggle with verses, so that you really kind of, it matures you, and there are questions. There are things that I have preached, that I don't understand 100%, but they want me to struggle with it so that I can come out with what I would think is the Lord's thought or idea on this particular passage. I can't see you doing that if you steal it from the internet or borrow it or subscribe to it, whatever the term would be.
Oh, certainly. I just preached through a passage in 1 Thessalonians, and we were talking about the rapture and whether you're pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, or pan-trib. And I threw that one out there, however it pans out.
I'm with you.
I did steal that from somebody. But again, to settle on one of those, if you take a sermon from someone, you're going to obviously have that belief. And so I gave them the option to study that out, to look at that from that perspective, and told them, I'm not going to pick it for you. But if I'm there ahead of you, then I'll know what you picked. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, that's good. A pastor with a sense of humor. Wow.
You have to. I think that's a survival key.
Yeah.
Or it should be.
Yeah. My wife always tells me, when are you going to grow up? And I go, probably never.
Yeah. No.
I'm her oldest child, she says. Well, okay, whatever. Okay, one last thought, and again, it's not in something I sent you, but it's a term that I want to ask you about because I find it disturbing somewhat. It's the term posturing. Are you familiar with that term? And I did an interview with somebody not too long ago, a few months, and that was the first time I ever heard that. This person said, well, we're actually posturing. And I go, what? What does that mean? And they said, well, we step back and we kind of wait and see what happens. I mean, boy, that just didn't register with me. I mean, how do we posture in a world that's coming after us full force with everything they got, and we're going to sit on the sidelines and wait to see what happens? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, to me, that's almost a defeatist attitude. It's more of a defensive position versus an offensive. And from that perspective, trying to react as fast as the world reacts, we're going to be way behind every time. We cannot keep up with the world, whether it's technology, whether it's the latest trend. I have been in ministry long enough to watch that. The church try to catch up to the world. We're always behind. And so to posture, to wait would just put us even further out of that scope. And so, I would not be obviously a fan of posturing, but also being on the offense, pushing back a little bit, getting out there a little bit harder. And hey, it's okay. We stand on certain things and based on the Bible, and that's what we believe, and that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wise, very wise. And I just ask questions that come across my desk or my internet, and I go, well, I'm not sure about that. But that was one that really bothered me, and I know a lot more younger pastors are doing that or following that pattern. I go, you need to be an active participant, and that means that it may cost you something to do that, but it's what God wants you to do. So, Pastor, in my last question today, imagine yourself in front of the Big C church, and you're called upon to deliver a message. Kind of a prophetic message, a message of encouragement, a message that will get people off of their pew and get active. What do you say to them?
The Lord is coming, and be ready. That would be my first thought. Obviously not prepared for that message of that, but it's the same message that I preach to my own congregants often, is that hope that we have in Christ of his return, and what are we doing in the meantime? And that's to get us thinking about, hey, being purposeful in what we do with our faith. That's some of the biggest challenges as well, is motivating people to put their faith into action. So something along those lines would probably be in that message.
Well, Pastor Charlie, you're a breath of fresh air, to be honest with you. I like down-to-earth pastors who have, down-to-earth problems, down-to-earth issues, and preach the word as simple and as honest as they possibly can. So if people are listening to us and they're going, I like this Pastor Charlie guy, how do they get a hold of you? How do they come to church? What's the name of the church again? I'll let you do all that information.
Yeah, we're at Pointway Alliance Church in Baxter, Minnesota, 7756 Highland Scenic Road. We're on Facebook. We have a webpage as well, pointway.org. You can find us there. Our service is at 10 a.m. It is a great family church. We are varied in ages and styles and everything that comes with that. So we have 80-year-olds, and we have, I think, 4 new babies this year. 3 are already arrived, and 1's on the way. So we are excited about that as well.
Well, Pastor Charlie, thank you for the time. Appreciate your insights, and we'll hopefully talk to you again.
Always. Thank you, Larry.
This isn't the end. It's only the beginning of your journey to trust God for the truth you never want to lose. We can help. Log on to citysitesurbanmedia.com today. Remember, there's only one truth and only one God, and you should know them both.